Hey guys, tonight we are peeling back the velvet curtains on one of history's most infamous monarchs. And trust me, you probably will not survive this royal sleepover without flinching. Imagine it, a vast, echoing palace where the air smells like lavender oil and something far worse. You walk past oil portraits of a younger, smug-faced Henry VIII, but you are not here to see his glory days. No, you are headed straight for his bedchamber. It is January 1547. The King of England is dying. Slowly, horribly. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and what time you are tuning in. I love seeing how far and wide this sleepy little history club reaches. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the door, and there he is. The once mighty Henry VIII lies bloated on a mountain of pillows, propped up in silk sheets embroidered with golden thread. But you do not see grandeur, you see rot. His legs are wrapped in cloth soaked with herbs. There are pewter bowls scattered on the floor, some still faintly steaming. One holds a sludge of honey, rosewater, and crushed bone meant to draw out the poison. Another is clearly meant for catching other fluids. The king is dying, but the room refuses to admit it. He weighs well over 350 pounds now, and not the kind of weight that suggests feasting and power. This is decay. His lower body is so swollen that courtiers have to lift and rotate him daily to keep his flesh from breaking open. Even breathing sounds like a labor. Each inhale a wheeze, each exhale a wet rattle. He is not alone. A bishop stands by, mumbling something about last rites. But Henry waves him off. "I am not dying," he croaks, though the stink of infection disagrees. His courtiers nut like bobbleheads, no one daring to contradict the sovereign. You cannot help but notice that even the rats in the walls seem quieter tonight. This is not just the end of a man. It is the end of a myth. Back when he was young, Henry had been a golden-haired marvel, 6 feet tall, muscular, charming. He jousted, danced, played instruments, and wrote poetry. Historians still argue whether those early years were truly golden or just polished propaganda. But no one disputes that the aging monarch before you is nearly unrecognizable from the fresh face prints who once wore white feathers and rode into tournaments to thunderous applause. Now, there are whispered jokes in court about how many men it takes to roll the king over. 4, usually, sometimes 6. His body emits a constant heat. One physician keeps a stick of cinnamon in his pocket just to hold under his nose. The king's bedroom is filled with relics, crucifixes, chalices, a massive gold ring shaped like a lion's head. But nothing here can save him. Not the saints, not the surgeons, not the endless jars of thick, tarry ointment. Some nights, the smell is so awful that even his dogs refuse to stay near the bed. There is one final comfort: the window. It overlooks the frozen Thames, where bonfires flicker and smoke curls lazily into the night sky. The ice carnival is in full swing down below, and laughter sometimes floats up to the king's window. He does not laugh back. Outside this bedchamber, England waits, not exactly in mourning, more like holding its breath. Everyone knows the king is dying, but no one is allowed to say it. Courtiers who speak too frankly have a way of being reassigned or quietly disappearing, and Henry's paranoia has only grown. He suspects everyone, his council, his servants, even the pages who change his linen. Some say he once had a servant flogged for changing a bandage too roughly. Others say he dreamed of ghosts, wives, mostly. But tonight, the ghosts are silent. A candle flickers by the bedside. The wax drips onto a scroll, his will, perhaps, or a prayer. It is hard to tell. Henry's hands are so swollen, they barely resemble hands at all. His fingers are stiff, curved like claws. His once prized ruby ring now digs into the flesh, and someone will have to cut it off once he is gone. And yet, he is still the king. Even now, gasping and sweating and leaking from half a dozen places, he commands attention. You can feel it, that strange magnetic pull of power, even when the body can no longer support it. He gives an order, and men scurry. He grunts, and a feast is prepared, even though he can barely eat more than broth. There is something grimly fascinating about watching a man with this much authority become a prisoner of his own flesh. You move closer. The room smells like a mixture of lavender, spoiled meat, and iron. One physician insists on burning sage. Another tries feather fans dipped in vinegar. None of it works. His legs are blackened at the ankles. There is talk that gangrene is setting in, but no one wants to mention amputation. It would kill him instantly. Someone in the room coughs, and Henry's eyes snap open. Even now, he glares like a thundercloud. His mouth twitches. "Write to France," he mutters. "Let them know I am strong." His voice cracks on that last word. Strong. You almost want to laugh. Almost. Then he shifts, and the sheets move with a sickening squelch. A new stain blooms beneath him. The room pretends not to notice. Some say he died long before his body gave out, that Henry, the golden boy, the warlord, the husband of 6 queens, had already left the building. What remained was something else entirely, a bloated shadow of glory. A man slowly dissolving into legend, into pus and perfume. But he is not dead yet, not quite. And tomorrow, the doctors will try something new. Again, sleep well. You wake to candlelight flickering against a canopy of embroidered lions and Tudor roses. The king has made it through the night, barely. His breathing is louder now, a rasping bellows that echoes off the tapestries. But the room has not quieted. Instead, it feels more like a waiting room for the apocalypse. This is not just a deathbed. It is a final act in a lifelong feast. You stare at the body stretched before you, and you wonder, how much can a human stomach hold? Because Henry VIII, more than any other king, ruled through appetite. Appetite for food, for women, for glory. And his body, now vast and veined and cruelly swollen, is its own sort of monument. Breakfast arrives before sunrise. You blink. Roast capon, oat cakes, thick cream, and spiced wine Yes, for a man who can barely sip broth, the trays are not for him. Not really. They are for the show. No one must think the king lacks appetite. Not even the servants delivering meals dare whisper the truth. The once voracious monarch now chews like a tortoise and spits half of it back into a linen cloth. Historians still argue whether Henry's legendary weight gain was purely the result of injury, gluttony, or something more systemic. A jousting accident in 1536 left him with a leg that never healed, robbing him of mobility. Before that, he was athletic, fond of fencing, riding, and tennis. Afterward, he was sedentary, irritable, and perpetually in pain. Some whisper that the fall damaged more than bone, that his brain, perhaps, began its slow descent into paranoia that very day. But whatever the cause, the effects are clear. His body is rebelling, his liver likely overwhelmed, his heart enlarged. And then there is his stomach, once praised for its size and endurance, now distended and unpredictable. You watch as a servant refills a goblet, red wine. A king swirls it, stares into the depths as if they might answer him. Once he bragged that he could drink any French noble under the table. Now one sip makes his eyes water. And yet, still, the food comes. Menus from Henry's reign reveal meals of epic scale. 14 dishes per course, sauces so thick they had to be carved, pies stuffed with live birds, and whole boars roasted with their tusks painted gold. His kitchens were the size of cathedrals. In 1 year alone, records show he consumed over 8,000 pounds of meat. That is 4 hippos, give or take. The quirky bit? One of his favorite dishes was a pudding made of marrow, sugar, and eggs, boiled in a sheep's stomach. Yes, really, Tudor fine dining. You move around the bed, careful not to disturb the royal limbs. Even the mattress bears the dents of his weight, and beneath it, planks reinforced with iron bars. They creak when he shifts. That is not metaphor. The king literally broke a bed once. Henry's physicians are pacing again. They talk in Latin. Something about phlegm, bile, and heat. One suggests more mercury. Another leeches. One, clearly exhausted, mumbles that perhaps the king needs to be bled anew. A page turns pale at the thought. This was the medical logic of the day. The body's health depended on the balance of 4 humors. Too much black bile, depression. Too much yellow, rage. You can imagine where Henry ranked. He was, quite literally, ruled by imbalance. You wonder, did anyone ever tell him no? Back when he was still young and golden, and slicing open pigs at feasts for sport, did anyone dare say, Majesty, perhaps ease off the sugar swans and goose liver custard? Probably not. Because here is the thing about power. It warps reality. When you are king, people applaud your appetite. They mistake indulgence for strength, and no one dares mention that it might be killing you until it already has. A low groan pulls you back. Henry is half awake now. His eyes flutter, then fix on something invisible. Anne? He murmurs. His voice sounds like wet paper tearing. Is that you? There is no Anne in the room. just one of the physicians, startled. You note it, another ghost in the king's head. First Jane, now Anne. He sees his queens in the shadows. Or maybe he always has. The morning continues. Chamber pots are changed. Cloths are burned. The king drifts in and out of sleep, mumbling about ships and traders. The court tiptoes. Outside the chamber, the kitchens do not stop. Feasts are still prepared. Servants are still trained to serve in total silence. This machine, this kingdom, continues even as its central cog begins to crumble. By noon, the king is once again drenched in sweat, not from fever, but from trying to sit up. He insists on inspecting something, perhaps a document, perhaps just the skyline. It takes 4 men to hoist him. His face turns purple. His breathing becomes a growl. Still, no one protests. He is, after all, the king. You marvel at the weight of it all, not just the physical burden of his body, but the symbolic one. Henry VIII was England. His body, decaying, massive, grotesque, is the metaphor you did not ask for, but cannot ignore. This kingdom grew fat on war and divorce and land seizures, and now the rot is showing. A servant offers him a glazed quail's egg on a gold spoon. Henry does not take it. Instead, he stares at the ceiling, whispering something in Latin. You catch a phrase, memento mori. Remember, you must die. You are not sure if he means it, or if he believes it, because kings are not supposed to die. They are meant to become statues, portraits, ghosts. But here he is, flash, stink, and failing breath. And you are only at the beginning. Afternoon fades, and with it, the weak winter sunlight that once filtered through the tall windows. The room dims, but no one dares light the lamps just yet, as if too much brightness might finally show everyone what they have tried so hard not to see. You hear it first, a squelch, then a hiss of discomfort. Henry has moved again, and this time, something has ruptured. The attendants do not flinch. They have been here before. One lifts the edge of the sheets, peers underneath, and with a subtle nod, signals to the others. They swarm with the precision of battlefield medics, fresh linens, hot cloths, rose water, vinegar, anything to clean the wound without disturbing the king's already frayed dignity. A wound, yes, but not a normal one. This is the infamous leg ulcer, or, to be precise, ulcers, plural. Historians still argue whether Henry's ulcers were venous, diabetic, or the result of osteomyelitis, bone infection. But whatever their cause, they are monstrous, open, weeping, cavernous. One source from the time described them as being wide enough to swallow a man's finger to the second knuckle. You involuntarily glance down at your own hands, and the smell, well, that is what haunts people. Even now, the chronic, inescapable stink of rot. They tried everything to mask it. Herbs, incense, cinnamon sachets tucked into sleeves. Once, someone even hung oranges from the rafters like Christmas baubles. None of it worked. You can still smell the death in the air, heavy and damp like a moldy cellar. You step back as two attendants peel away the old bandages. What clings to the cloth looks less like blood and more like stew. One mutters a prayer. Another wrings out a rag with shaking hands. Henry groans, but does not cry out. He is used to it. In fact, he barely reacts. Somewhere in this bloated vessel is a man who once led armies, composed love songs, and hunted stags through dewy English forests. Now he cannot walk without agony. His world has shrunk to the size of a mattress. The physicians murmur about lancing again. They have done it before, pierced the ulcers with silver needles, scraped away the infected flesh, even tried to cauterize one with red-hot iron. Once, the king roared so loud during a procedure that a falcon outside the window took off mid-hunt. But now he just moans, lips slack, eyes unfocused. You wonder if he is still inside there somewhere, or if the pain has finally pushed him into some dark, internal corridor where no one, not even a king, can be followed. Meanwhile, the court outside his chamber walks a tightrope. No one is allowed to say the word dying, but everyone is preparing for it. Succession plans are being reviewed. Loyalists are whispering. Enemies are writing letters. Some are already eyeing tapestries and silver, as if a state division might start early. And here is the odd little fringe detail. Henry had a mechanical leg brace custom built in secret, not to help him heal, but so he could still appear in public, standing tall. It was padded, painted to match his stockings, and locked at the knee. The illusion of strength, theatrics, even in agony. He was obsessed with image. This was a man who spent hours choosing fabrics for his doublets, who wore bejeweled codpieces so large they could have doubled as wine flasks. And now, he is naked under stained linen, his body a ruin, but still, attendants style his hair. They oil his beard. They make him presentable. For whom, you wonder? God? Ghosts? Posterity? A fly buzzes near the wound, and an attendant snaps a cloth at it, then winces when the motion stirs the air. Even moving the sheets sends waves of scent into the room, sweet and sour, metallic and musty, the kind of smell you carry with you long after you leave. But you stay. You stay because this is not just a body failing. It is a symbol unraveling. Henry VIII was a king who reshaped his country to suit his desires. He built churches and tore them down, married and murdered queens, changed England's religion with a signature, and now, reduced to grunts and pus, he cannot change his own linens. At the far end of the chamber, a scribe enters. He does not look at the bed. His job is to update the king's will again. Because even now, Henry revises. He is determined to control what comes next. Who rules? Who benefits? Who suffers? He dictates slowly, between labored breaths, something about Edward, something about lands in the north. You cannot make out all the words, but you catch the phrase, no foreign prince. He means Mary's potential marriage, perhaps, or maybe Elizabeth's uncertain future. This man, who once feared no war, now fears paperwork more than plague. More ink, he growls, and someone rushes to refill the scribe's quill. There is a pause. The king closes his eyes, and for a moment, it seems he has drifted again. But then he speaks, clearly, almost lucidly. I am not afraid. Everyone hears it, and no one believes it, because this is the man who burned friends, beheaded wives, and banished daughters out of fear. Fear of rebellion, fear of weakness, fear of dying without a legacy. Now that legacy is curled up under linen, festering, and you, standing there in the shadows, realize something chilling. This is not even the worst of it. Not yet. You lean against a cold stone pillar as the last of the light dies completely. The chamber is fully lamplit now. No daylight, just the glow of beeswax candles, casting rippling shadows across Henry's mottled face. You cannot help but notice the way the flicker makes his features seem to move even when he is still, like some ancient idol that occasionally breathes. It is nearly evening, and the king is talking to people who are not there. Thomas, tell them I was right. The name hangs in the air like smoke. It is not clear which Thomas he means. There were many. Thomas More, who he once called a friend and later ordered beheaded for refusing to acknowledge his supremacy over the church. Thomas Cromwell, his brilliant fixer who helped dissolve monasteries and orchestrate his marriages, and who was also eventually executed. Thomas Wolsey, the cardinal who tried and failed to secure his annulment and died disgraced. So many Thomases, and all of them betrayed or betrayed him. Depends on how you frame it. Historians still argue whether Henry was calculating or simply a product of spiraling paranoia. But here, now, with the king mumbling to ghosts, it hardly matters. Betrayal has become its own kind of communion. He clutches at the sheets. His hands are swollen, his fingers curled like claws. The veins are dark, like rivers traced beneath waxy skin. One of his rings no longer fits. A page boy tries to tug it off with oil and cloth, failing twice before finally sliding it free. Henry hisses, then laughs. A strange, hollow sound, almost gleeful. Gone too far to come back, he whispers. You shiver. The room feels colder. It is around now that the physicians begin to disagree more openly. Some say nothing more can be done. Others suggest a final purgative, perhaps another herbal tincture, maybe a purge by vomiting, to release the toxins. One recommends feeding the king powdered pearls, a luxury believed by some to counter poison. Another proposes mashed emeralds. Yes, emeralds. Ground stones as medicine. The Tudors were creative in all the wrong ways. You glance toward the corner where the royal apothecary's chest sits. Inside, a zoo of bizarre ingredients. Powdered deer antler, snake oil, ambergris from whales, thistle, opium, and crushed beetles, all part of the king's personal regimen at one time or another. But these are just guesses. The truth is, no one knows what is wrong with Henry. Not fully. Some suspect diabetes, based on his constant thirst and festering wounds. Others point to Cushing's syndrome, which could explain his fat accumulation, mood swings, and rapid decline. A few have even whispered about syphilis, but there is no concrete proof. In fact, Historians still argue whether that rumor was a smear campaign by foreign diplomats, or maybe just an easy explanation for a difficult man. What is certain is this: the body on the bed is failing faster now. You see it in his breath, shallow, frantic, in his color, drifting between gray, yellow, and blotchy red, and in his speech, which swings from lucid to rambling in the span of minutes. One moment, he is demanding an update on the Navy. The next, he is calling for Jane Seymour, his true wife, the one who gave him his longed-for son and died before he could tire of her. He asks if the baby is well. That baby, Edward, is now 9 years old and being guarded like a crown jewel in a countryside manor. The boy barely knows his father. Their entire relationship is written in royal decrees, gifts, and 1 or 2 stiff portraits. But Henry imagines a different story. Tell him I was strong. His voice cracks on the last word. You catch a whiff of something sharp and sweet, rosewater. A maid has brought in fresh flowers, a hopeful distraction from the odor creeping from beneath the sheets. She places the vase near the window and bows deeply before retreating. Henry does not notice. He is focused on his own hands, examining the nails like they belong to someone else. Then, as if jolted, he looks around. "Where is the sword?" he barks. The attendants freeze. They know what he means. Not a literal sword, but the sword of state, the ceremonial weapon that represents his power, usually displayed beside the throne during grand processions or foreign receptions. It is not here, of course, but someone dashes off to retrieve it. In the meantime, a court musician is summoned. The king demands music, an old folk tune from his youth. The harpsichord player arrives within minutes, breathless and pale, and begins to play. The melody is soft, lilting, almost melancholy. You watch Henry's eyes glaze again. And here is your quirky fact for the night. Henry VIII composed music, actual music, love songs, religious hymns, and the famous pastime with good company, which was basically the Tudor version of a party anthem. He played the lute, sang, even danced once when he could. You glance at the king now. That composer is long gone. The musician continues, and for a moment, silence falls, peaceful, unnerving. The king closes his eyes for the first time today. He looks, not quite calm, but less tormented. Then, thud, the sword arrives, borne on a velvet cushion, heavy, ornate, studded with jewels. It is placed beside the bed, gleaming in the candlelight. Henry stirs, opens one eye, and nods. "There," he says. You wonder what comfort it offers. A piece of forged steel, heavy enough to kill, useless in healing. But perhaps it reminds him of who he once was. A warrior, a conqueror, a man who faced armies and claimed supremacy over a church that had crowned emperors. Now he can barely raise a goblet. The harpsichord falls silent. Everyone stands still. Then the king murmurs, almost inaudibly, "Do not let them see. You do not know who they are. Courtiers? Enemies? His daughters?" But you understand what he means. Do not let them see the king die. Let them remember the figure in armor, not the one in pus-stained linen. A moment later, he falls into a deep sleep, his chest rising and falling in uneven rhythm. And you, still in the dark corner, realize this might be your only moment of quiet for days. You wake with a start, unsure when you even fell asleep. The stone floor beneath you is cold, your joints ache, and your mouth tastes like copper and dust. Someone must have drawn a curtain around the king's bed while you dozed, because now it stands veiled in rich burgundy, tapestries woven with gold thread, and the royal crest puffed out like sails in the thick, still air. You hear voices, low, tense, like gamblers whispering over a high-stakes game. Behind the curtain, Henry is still alive, but just barely. One of the physicians has emerged, blotting sweat from his own forehead with a lace-trimmed kerchief that is far too delicate for the moment. He speaks to a clerk, urgently, something about last rites that catches your attention. It is a delicate issue, because officially, Henry is still supreme head of the Church of England. Appointing a priest to tend to his soul as death creeps closer is not as simple as ringing a bell. It is a political act, an admission of mortality, maybe even a whiff of Catholicism, depending on the priest. Historians still argue whether Henry died a true Protestant, a secret Catholic, or just a man who twisted theology to fit his personal whims. What is certain is this: he is scared, not of hell, perhaps, but of fading from history, of losing control over his story. The door creaks open, and in slips Archbishop Thomas Cranmer. You know him by his solemn gait and impossibly angular face, like someone carved a bishop from bone and parchment. He is the man who helped Henry annul his first marriage, the man who baptized Edward, the man who reformed England's entire church structure and managed to survive Henry's brutal swings of favor. Cranmer approaches the bed, nods at the veiled figure within, and lowers to his knees. He does not speak at first, just places a hand gently on the king's chest through the curtain. Then softly, "If your majesty can hear me, press my hand to show your trust in Christ." There is silence. Long, too long. Then a faint movement, a twitch, maybe just the weight of breath shifting the hand. But Cranmer nods, accepting it as the sign he needed. No last confession, no grand final statement, just pressure from a swollen, half-dead hand. The soul signed over, the rites complete. You know what that means. The end is close, but no one says it. Instead, the court shifts into a bizarre half-reality. The chamber becomes a stage set for denial. Ministers continue discussing letters. Scribes sharpen quills. Pages polish unused goblets. Everyone plays their part. And Henry? He begins talking again, or rather, rambling, disjointed phrases, warbled demands. At one point, he says, "Call Anne." Then, moments later, "Tell her I forgive her." And who? Boleyn? Of Cleves? Even he might not know. His mind is a library on fire. Flashes of memory leaping up in unpredictable bursts before collapsing into ash. He speaks of hunting again, You hear the words, Hartford, Arrow, my dogs, and then he chuckles, a soft, private laugh. You imagine what he sees, the chase, the thrill, the burst of a deer's flight through thicketed woods. It is one of the last things he truly loved. Hunting was his escape, his spectacle, his theater of masculinity, until one day in 1536, when everything changed. Remember that jousting accident? He was 44, a big man by then, already slowing. But still, he rode out in gleaming armor and took his place for the tournament. The lance snapped, the horse stumbled, Henry fell, and did not move. Accounts differ. Some say he was unconscious for 2 hours. Others say less. But everyone agrees it was the turning point. After that, his ulcers grew worse. His moods darkened. He gained weight like a collapsing star gains gravity. Relentless, inevitable. Historians still argue whether that fall caused a traumatic brain injury. His rage increased. His decisions became erratic. His paranoia bloomed like mold in a locked cellar. It is almost poetic. The King of England fell not by enemies or rebellion, but by a clumsy horse and his own stubborn pride. And now, as he lays dying, that moment keeps returning to him like a song stuck in his head. He mutters something about my legs, my cursed legs. Then, should have listened to Norfolk. And then, chillingly, she screamed. You glance around. No one moves. No one wants to ask what he means. The physician consults his notes. Something about laudanum dosage. Another dose is administered. Opium syrup mixed with wine, meant to dull the pain. Instead, it unlocks the doors of his mind. Suddenly, he is shouting, "Traitors, you will not know. I am your king. I am England." The guards step forward, unsure if he is about to leap up or collapse. He does neither. Instead, he thrashes once, then gasps. A dry, tearing gasp, like someone trying to breathe through sand. His eyes open wide, bloodshot, and for a moment, just a moment, you see something ancient in them, like he is looking through centuries, screaming at time itself. Then he slumps. Silence. The physician steps forward, feels the pulse, looks to Cranmer. Nothing is said, but everything is understood. Henry VIII is dying, not yet dead, not officially, but something vital has gone out. His body will cling for hours, maybe days, but his soul, that twitch was its farewell. You would think this would trigger panic, or weeping, or at least solemnity. Instead, the room reacts with strange, sterile efficiency. The chamberlain orders the guards changed. The clerk begins drafting the coded messages to foreign courts. Someone starts checking locks on the treasury vault. Another asks, quietly, whether it is too early to prepare the embalming herbs. Meanwhile, the king's mouth hangs open, and you realize something horrific. His body is so swollen now, so bloated with fluid and inflammation, that when he finally dies, it may rupture. Yes, like a rotten wine skin. You remember a story, whispered among servants, when Henry is finally entombed, his coffin will leak, explode even. They will call it divine judgment, or maybe just bad carpentry. Either way, the image sticks, and still, he breathes. Barely, but for all practical purposes, the reign is over. You lose track of how long it has been since that last rasp of breath. It could be hours or minutes. The air is so still, you half expect the world outside to have stopped spinning too. A thick fog of unspoken truth hangs over the chamber. Henry VIII is dead, but no one dares say it aloud, because here is the strange thing about royal death. It is not just a biological event. It is a diplomatic minefield, a public performance, a carefully orchestrated dance of succession, secrecy, and power preservation. And Henry, being Henry, has made it harder than most. You shift quietly, watching the bustle begin behind the veil of feigned composure. The moment his soul began slipping away, the real business started. Not mourning, but maneuvering. Messages must be sent, but not before the Privy Council agrees on wording. Nobles must be summoned, but not all at once. No sudden moves. You do not want foreign spies getting ahead of the story. And above all, the prince must be protected. Prince Edward, just 9 years old, is the heir, the son of Jane Seymour, Henry's one true love, or, at least, the one who gave him what the others could not, a male heir. But he is a fragile child, delicate and pale, often ill. The boy is being raised in the countryside under constant watch, and now he is about to become King of England before he has even learned how to sit through an entire Privy Council meeting without nodding off. Historians still argue whether Edward was ever truly ready, or merely a pawn moved by his handlers. What we know is this: as Henry's breathing slows to nothing, messengers are already galloping into the frost-bitten dawn, with wax-sealed scrolls marked with ciphers and crimson threads. And all the while, the king remains officially alive, because protocol matters. You hear a clerk explaining it to a young page. The king can only be declared dead when his successor has been informed, not before. That is the rule. That is the law. That is the dance. Meanwhile, inside the curtain, Henry is doing a grim impersonation of sleep. Eyes half-lidded, lips parted, skin already fading to an eerie marble. A smell begins to change. You notice it first, faintly sweet, oddly metallic. It reminds you of overripe fruit left too long in a locked pantry. You catch the faintest crackle of skin drying out, like parchment near a fire. His body is so bloated with illness and neglect that the slow decomposition has started before his heart gives its final stutter. One physician leans in, sniffing discreetly, then steps back, expression unreadable. Another writes a few notes and excuses himself, likely off to prepare the preservation herbs. You know what is coming: myrrh, frankincense, bay leaves, dried lavender. Not for sentiment, just to mask what is inevitable. You might not want to hear this next part, but hey, we warned you. The stories say that when Henry's coffin was finally sealed and brought to St. George's Chapel in Windsor, it was so poorly constructed that it began to leak. Some said it burst. That black, tar-like fluid seeped from beneath the lid and pooled onto the church floor. A dog came along and licked it. No one stopped it. The priest, either deeply unnerved or dryly sarcastic historians still debate which reportedly quoted a passage from the Book of Kings during the burial service. And dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Bit dramatic? Maybe. Fitting? Absolutely. But that moment is still in the future. Here in the present, you sit in silence as the great machinery of monarchy groans to life. The king's body is still warm, just barely, but he is no longer king. Edward is, kind of. And now comes the real fun. The will. Oh yes, Henry's last will and testament. Not just a document, but a weapon. A living, breathing chessboard of rivalries, bribes, and grudges written in ink that may or may not be legally binding. Henry made his last amendments to it in December of 1546, less than a month before today. He was lucid then, or so they claim, but there are whispers that the signature on the final version was actually a stamp not written by Henry's hand at all. Forgery? Legal loophole? Depends on who you ask, and how close they stood to power when the will was read. The document is massive, filled with enough plot twists to make a soap opera blush. He names Edward as heir, of course, but also lays out a chain of succession that carefully skips over certain people, notably Mary and Elizabeth. His daughters by Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn are mentioned, but only after a long list of what-ifs. Even in death, he is playing favorites. But the real kicker? The Regency Council. Because Edward is a child, Henry appoints 16 men to guide him, a dream team of dukes, lords, and schemers who are expected to work together. Spoiler, they absolutely will not. Even now, as you watch the nobility file into hushed backrooms, you can feel the tension, the silent jostling, the fake smiles, the sudden silences when someone enters. Everyone wants a slice of what is coming. You spot Edward Seymour, Jane's brother, standing near the window. Tall, smug, already acting like a king in all but name. You would bet a bag of Tudor gold that he already has a plan to outmaneuver the others and become Lord Protector. He is ambitious, ruthless, the kind of man Henry might have admired if he had not also deeply distrusted everyone with a backbone. As the sun rises outside, painting the leaded windows in streaks of gold and blood, the chamber starts to shift from vigil to bureaucracy. More parchment, more signatures, more whispered arguments about precedence and phrasing. Meanwhile, Henry's body lies alone behind the curtain, already beginning to collapse inward like a deflated wineskin. And here is your quirky tidbit. Henry VIII was buried with the woman he called his true wife, Jane Seymour. Not Catherine, not Anne, not the dazzling Anne of Cleves, or the doomed Catherine Howard. Just Jane, the one who gave him Edward, the one who died before he could grow to resent her. It is almost poetic, in a bleak Tudor sort of way. The guard's chain shifts. The chamber empties slightly. A second set of candles is lit. And finally, Cranmer steps forward, lays a hand on the royal curtain, and gives a nod. The king is dead. Long live the king. You blink, expecting the room to erupt in mourning or ceremonial trumpet blasts. But no, this is not the movies. It is real life. And in the Tudor court, real life is built from layers of silence, tension, and meticulously rehearsed reactions. When Cranmer nods to confirm the king's death, nobody weeps, nobody wails, nobody even says the word dead. Instead, the chamber cools several degrees, as though a ghost has exhaled. What follows is not a funeral. It is containment. You hear hushed voices behind the arras. One clerk is dispatched to fetch the Lord Chancellor. Another carries a sealed packet with instructions to the Tower. A third disappears with a velvet pouch. You suspect it holds the Great Seal of England, which must now be physically transferred to the new regime. These are the rituals that keep a kingdom from collapsing into chaos. Slow, practiced, invisible. And still, the public does not know, because announcing the death of a monarch is not simply an announcement. It is an earthquake, and Henry knew this. That is why, before he died, he gave explicit orders that his death must not be revealed until everything was in place. Edward installed. The Regency Council activated. The kingdom locked down like a fortress. Until then, the king must remain, in the official record, indisposed. Now, you might be wondering, what happens to Henry's body in the meantime? Well, it stays here, on display, propped up with careful linens, sprinkled with herbs, guarded by halberds and ritual silence. And slowly, very slowly, it begins to change. You remember how bloated he was? That is about to become problematic. The body of Henry VIII is an unstable container. His ulcers were so infected by the end, some reports suggest they never truly closed. His waistline measured over 54 inches, and his heart quite possibly damaged by years of gout, diabetes, and untreated injuries, has already stopped pushing blood to the extremities. That means stagnation, gases, expansion. You get the idea. Historians still argue whether the infamous exploding coffin story is true. But even if it is a later exaggeration, something very close to it did happen. Servants would whisper of strange noises, of the stench that worsened by the hour, of how no one wanted to be the one to turn him or adjust his robe. You wonder if this is what he would have wanted. The man who had portraits touched up to look younger, who banned mirrors from certain rooms, who made laws about his divine authority as king. And now, he is a helpless sack of rotting flesh in a candlelit room. Still, his legacy is far from buried. Even now, as preparations for the official death announcement continue, nobles and secretaries are revisiting letters, contracts, bribes. Henry's shadow stretches across every parchment in the palace. Who was pardoned last? Who was condemned? Who received land grants in the final week? These details matter, not because anyone expects the dead king to change his mind, but because they know how quickly the survivors will reshape the narrative. Take, for example, Catherine Parr. She is still alive, his sixth and final wife, the one who survived. Smart, tactful, and deeply religious, Catherine had managed to navigate Henry's moods better than any of her predecessors. She knew when to be silent, when to flatter, and when to quote scripture. But even she had almost fallen. Henry once signed a warrant for her arrest after she debated theology too confidently. She talked her way out of it, barely. Now, as widow of the king, she technically outranks most noblewomen, but not for long. Because once the death is announced, her influence will evaporate unless she acts quickly. Somewhere in the palace, she is packing not just dresses and jewelry, but letters, correspondence, maybe even small books, banned ones, hidden beneath her nightgowns. She had Protestant leanings, and that was dangerous under Henry's unpredictable swing between Catholic tradition and Reformation policy. You suspect she will leave court soon, and guess who she ends up marrying? Hold on to your nightcap. Catherine Parr will go on to wed Thomas Seymour. Yes, the brother of Jane Seymour. Yes, the same Seymour family now circling little Edward like vultures with gold leaf on their beaks. But that story is for later. Right now, your mind drifts back to the death chamber. Cranmer has taken charge of Henry's spiritual care, but the logistical side, what to do with the body, how to transport it, how to prepare it for display, falls to others. And the clock is ticking. Every moment they wait, the body becomes less manageable. Eventually, they will embalm him. Sort of. The Tudor method of embalming was less science, more superstition, a mixture of strong wines, herbs, and linen stuffing, plus sealing the body in a lead-lined coffin. But even this is not enough when the person in question has spent the last decade swelling like a pudding in a tin. Here is your quirky tidbit. Some say that before the funeral procession began, the coffin was packed with crushed roses, not just for scent, but symbolism. White for purity, red for the House of Lancaster. All very poetic if you ignore the real reason, to drown out the odor of royal decay. And here is something even darker. Do you remember Anne Boleyn? Well, after Henry had her executed, her body was buried in an unmarked grave at the Tower. No ceremony, no roses, and yet, at the end of it all, Henry is the one rotting in velvet, surrounded by sycophants. She's the one people still romanticize. Historians still argue whether Anne was the great love of his life, or simply the obsession that drove him mad. But one thing is certain, her legacy haunts us even now. You hear footsteps outside the chamber, horses, wagons, guards shuffling into tighter formation. The announcement is close. Everything must be perfect. And finally, just after nightfall, a royal herald steps forward. He wears crimson. His scroll is long, and his voice trembles only slightly as he reads, Henry VIII, by the grace of God, King of England, France, and Ireland, is dead. You can almost feel the ripple as the news travels down corridors, through servants' halls, past stables, out into the streets. A great collective pause, a breath held, and then chaos begins. You would think that when a king dies, the world would freeze in solemn reverence. But this is Tudor England. Nothing stays still for long, especially not when there is power in flux and a crown sitting on the head of a sickly 9-year-old. As the news breaks, there is a beat of silence across the court, and then everyone starts running. Not literally, that would be undignified, but behind closed doors, in hushed corridors, and candlelit privy chambers, a frenzied scramble ignites like fire through dry thatch. Courtiers whisper, dukes whisper louder. Someone sends for a lawyer. Someone else sends for armor. Because now, it is not just about mourning. It is about making sure you are still standing when the dust settles. You step through one of the gallery halls and catch a whiff of beeswax polish and damp stone. Just ahead, two nobles stand stiffly, exchanging stiff words and stiffer glances. One of them is Thomas Wriothesley. Yes, try saying that with a mouthful of bread pudding, Lord Chancellor and longtime royal bootlicker. He is already strategizing, moving himself closer to the soon-to-be Lord Protector. That would be Edward Seymour, if he has his way. Which, spoiler alert, he absolutely will. The moment Henry's death is official, Edward Seymour becomes the most powerful man in England. Not king, not quite, but close. Because someone has to run the kingdom until little Edward VI is old enough to understand what Parliament even is, let alone command it. The thing is, Henry's will have called for a group decision-making body, a regency council of 16 all equals. But guess what? Power sharing is hard, especially among men with titles, tempers, and a taste for velvet doublets. Historians still argue whether Henry truly intended for the council to act without a single leader, or whether he privately assumed someone would naturally take charge. And take charge Seymour does. Within days, he wrangles a new title, Lord Protector of the Realm, which sounds noble, until you realize it gives him almost monarchical authority without the pesky burden of actually being king. You imagine Henry in whatever cloudy afterlife he now resides, watching this unfold with clenched fists and flared nostrils. Meanwhile, Edward VI, tiny, pale, and probably allergic to everything except Psalms, is being rushed through royal procedures at warp speed. He is measured for coronation robes, schooled in protocol, taught how to wave. The boy barely knows how to hold a quill properly, but he is now supreme head of the Church of England. Because sure, why not? Back at the palace, the body of Henry VIII is finally being moved. You peek down a stone staircase to catch a glimpse of the coffin. It is enormous, gilded, decorated with golden angels, lions, Tudor roses, and because irony is not a Tudor invention, crimson velvet drape to symbolize divine kingship. It takes several oxen to pull the funeral chariot. Here is your quirky tidbit. The funeral procession from London to Windsor was a multi-day affair with over 1,000 participants. Think of it as the worst group hike in history. Freezing temperatures, miserable roads, horses slipping on mud, and dozens of nobles pretending they are not cold because prestige demands they wear silks in January. The coffin was accompanied by a wax effigy of Henry VIII, fully dressed in regalia and propped upright for all to see. Yes, imagine being stuck walking behind a lifelike doll of a man whose body is decomposing less than 10 feet away. The effigy even had real hair. You cannot make this stuff up. The pageantry, of course, was meant to display continuity, and grandeur. Look how majestic our dead king was. But underneath all the drum rolls and gilded banners, the message was simpler. Do not panic. We still know what we are doing. Do they? Well, as the procession crawls toward Windsor, Edward Seymour is already issuing orders in the king's name. He sets up a new privy council, friendly to his interests. He arranges for his younger brother, Thomas Seymour, to get a cushy court position. He even starts eyeing potential marriage alliances for the boy king, all while wearing a smug little smirk that you really want to flick off his face. And Catherine Parr, remember her? Well, she is not wasting time either. She is still officially Queen Dowager, and that title comes with perks, money, estates, precedence. But more than that, it gives her leverage. She knows exactly how fragile her position is in a court that just shed its king like a snakeskin. So she does what smart survivors do. She disappears for a bit. Then she reappears, married to Thomas Seymour. Yep, Henry's widow, and his son's Uncle Ty, and not in secret, less than 6 months after the king's death. Scandalous? You bet. But also practical. She gets protection. He gets access. And together, they form a very dangerous circle around the boy king. Of course, Thomas Seymour is not content with being a royal uncle. He wants more. You hear whispers in the halls. Seymour has been sneaking into young Edward's bedchamber in the mornings, trying to bond with him, bringing him small gifts, speaking ill of Edward Seymour, the Lord Protector. He is laying groundwork, planting seeds. This will not end well. But again, that is for later. Right now, as the final stretch of Henry's funeral procession reaches Windsor Castle, you feel something shift. Inside St. George's Chapel, the black banners are hung. The coffin is carried inside. The priests murmur Latin blessings. The air smells like incense, old stone, and secrets. And over everything looms that eerie silence again, the kind that comes not from peace, but from unfinished business. Henry's body is finally laid to rest, next to Jane Seymour, just as he wished. Remember that? Not Anne Boleyn, not Catherine of Aragon, not Catherine Howard, whose ghost supposedly still walks the tower. Just Jane, the quiet one, the one who gave him a son, the one who never lived long enough to disappoint him. As the final chants echo and the nobles file out of the chapel, you realize that England is not grieving. Not really. It is resetting. The crown may rest on a child's head, but the game has begun anew. Every smile you see in court is a strategy. Every handshake is a trap. Every letter is a weapon in disguise. The king is dead. Long live the puns. You wake to the quiet hum of intrigue that now blankets the palace like a fog. Everything seems eerily calm on the surface, but if you have learned anything about Henry's world, it is that calm usually means someone is sharpening a dagger in the background. So, where are we? The king is in his grave, or at least what is left of him. Edward VI is now king in title, if not in authority. Edward Seymour, the new Lord Protector, is already draped in borrowed glory. But there is someone else watching all of this unfold with dangerous interest. Step forward. Thomas Seymour. Yes, that Seymour The brother, the ambitious one, the handsome one, the impatient one. You watch him from a gallery above as he strides through the halls like he owns the place, his cloak swinging behind him like a challenge. His recent marriage to Catherine Parr should have been enough to keep him satisfied. But no, he wants more. Specifically, he wants control of young Edward. Not just influence, but guardianship, daily access, preferably with a side of flattery and future promises. Historians still argue whether Thomas's obsession with the boy king was born of genuine affection or pure political greed. But one thing is clear, he was not subtle. His schemes begin almost immediately. He starts by appealing directly to the Privy Council for custody of Edward. This fails. Then he starts showing up at Edward's rooms uninvited. That gets noticed. He tries bribing the household staff. He attempts to charm the boy with coins and compliments. You can practically hear the desperation creaking behind his polished smile. And then he makes his most spectacular mistake yet. He starts meddling with Princess Elizabeth. Now, let us be very clear. Elizabeth is 13, whip smart, and already cautious to a fault. She knows exactly how dangerous court life is for a young girl, especially one with royal blood, Protestant leanings, and a famously executed mother. And yet, here comes Uncle Seymour, practically skipping down the hallway, flirting with Elizabeth like she is a barmaid in a tavern. You sit in on one of these moments. He bursts into her rooms early in the morning, tickling her, pulling back her bed curtains, making jokes that are uncomfortable. Catherine Parr is often present, laughing nervously, brushing it off, but the discomfort clings to the air like mildew. Your quirky tidbit? Thomas Seymour once tried to cut Elizabeth's black mourning dress off her body with a knife, laughing, supposedly, as a joke. Yes, that happened. You can imagine how quickly that joke curdled into something darker. Eventually, Catherine Parr sees the writing on the wall. Or maybe it is just the cold stare Elizabeth begins giving her husband. Either way, Elizabeth is swiftly sent away, removed from the household, quietly, firmly. Catherine dies not long after, from complications of childbirth. Her baby girl, Mary Seymour, will disappear from the records a few years later, probably dead, possibly erased. Now, Thomas Seymour is alone, and even more reckless. And what does a reckless man do when denied? He doubles down. You learn that he begins plotting to abduct Edward, not kill him. No, Seymour's fantasy involves spiriting the boy away to his own household, becoming his beloved father figure, and then pulling the strings of power like a second-rate puppet master. One night, he even tries sneaking into the royal apartments. Yes, picture it. Thomas Seymour in the dead of night, slipping through the darkness with a key and a wild idea. He is caught by a guard. There is shouting, confusion, and in the struggle, he shoots the king's dog. That is not a euphemism. He literally kills Edward's spaniel. Not great optics. This is where the line snaps. The Privy Council arrests him, interrogates him, and then, after much hesitation, puts him on trial. Treason is a strong word, but in Tudor England, strong words are useful. And remember, his brother is Lord Protector, so Thomas is executed. Historians still argue whether Edward Seymour allowed the execution purely for political necessity or out of genuine betrayal. But the body count does not lie. One more Seymour bites the dust. You pause to breathe. The court is quieter now, but not calmer, because Edward Seymour, who has just eliminated his own brother to protect his power, is about to fall into the same trap as every man who rose too fast. He thinks the boy king will stay a boy forever. Spoiler, he will not. Edward VI, now around 11 years old, is growing into his crown with surprising sharpness. He is sickly, yes, but intelligent, pious, and increasingly aware that he is being used as a mascot for other men's ambitions. And he does not like that. You lean closer as Edward begins keeping detailed notes on council meetings. He writes letters in his own hand. He studies scripture, but also law. He even starts issuing opinions on international politics. By 12, he is correcting ambassadors. By 13, he is pushing back against Seymour's decisions, and that makes Seymour nervous. Your mainstream historical fact? Edward Seymour's downfall comes not from a dramatic betrayal, but from a steady erosion of trust. Nobles begin complaining that he is too self-serving, too slow to respond to rebellions, too dismissive of others' advice. Sound familiar? Eventually, a group of counselors, led by John Dudley, the Earl of Warwick, stage what we would now call a very polite coup. They surround Seymour's house with guards, take him into custody, and force him to resign his protectorship. At first, he is merely imprisoned. Later, he is executed. You stare out over the Tower courtyard and wonder if Henry ever imagined both Seymour brothers, the golden uncles he entrusted with his son, would die like this. Alone, betrayed, discarded by the same political machine they once fueled. The young king remains. For now, but shadows are gathering again. John Dudley, who engineered Seymour's fall, is not exactly a champion of selflessness. He has plans, and he is watching Edward very closely. You feel it in the corridors, in the way servants move more quietly, in the way letters are now passed with greater caution, in the way the throne is always polished, always present, always waiting. The age of Henry is over, but his ghost walks beside every decision, every betrayal, every crown. You feel the weight of history pressing down as Edward VI edges closer to his teenage years, still sickly, still pale, but sharpening his mind like a blade. At this point, the kingdom seems to be holding its breath, caught between hope and the inevitability of change. The man behind the curtain now is John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, a cunning and ambitious courtier who steps into the power vacuum with a practiced smile. You see him navigating the royal court like a seasoned chess player, moving pieces with precision, always calculating his next advantage. He is no Lord Protector officially. He never takes that title, but effectively, he is the king's chief advisor, master of England's fate. The transition is seamless on paper, but underneath, the court is simmering. Dudley's rise marks a shift from the Seymour chaos to a more polished, calculated regime. You might think this is an improvement, less violence, fewer impulsive decisions. Yet, Dudley's rule brings its own brand of tension. He is ruthless in maintaining control, quietly sidelining opponents, and tightening his grip. You wander the corridors of Whitehall Palace, hearing whispers about the religious upheavals under Dudley's guidance. Remember, Henry VIII's break with Rome was still fresh, and Edward's advisors are pushing for a more thorough Protestant Reformation. Churches change their services, bishops are replaced, and sermons grow increasingly fiery, enough to unsettle even the most faithful. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some Londoners complained that the new Protestant clergy made worship feel more like a stern schoolmaster's lecture than a spiritual experience. Imagine your Sunday service turning into a history test. Not exactly inspiring, right? Historians still argue whether Dudley was motivated more by genuine Protestant zeal or a desire to consolidate power through religious reform. The truth probably lies somewhere in between, but either way, the kingdom is unsettled. Meanwhile, Edward VI is no longer just a passive figurehead. He starts to assert his own will, influenced by his tutors and advisors, but with a growing sense of independence. You observe him poring over texts, debating doctrine, and even challenging his counsel on certain matters. The sickly boy is developing a sharp mind and a stern demeanor that surprise many. As the young king matures, the pressure mounts on Dudley to secure the Tudor dynasty's future. You hear of secret talks about marriage alliances and political pacts. Every decision is a balancing act between strengthening the realm and avoiding the explosive factionalism that marked Henry's reign. Then comes the introduction of Lady Jane Grey, a distant cousin of Edward and a Protestant favorite. Dudley begins grooming her as a potential heir, fearing the Catholic Mary Tudor's claim could undo all the religious progress. Jane is educated, refined, and well-versed in scripture, making her a perfect candidate to continue Edward's reforms. But her story is a powder keg waiting to ignite. You can almost smell the tension rising as factions in the court draw lines in the sand. The question of succession is no longer just an academic exercise. It is a fight for the soul of England. In the meantime, Edward's health continues to decline. Tuberculosis lurks in the shadows, silently gnawing away at his youthful strength. His cough grows worse. His face pales further. The boy king is racing against time, knowing that the future depends on decisions he may not live to see unfold. You watch as he clings to power and faith, embodying both the promise and fragility of the Tudor line. And through it all, John Dudley maneuvers deftly, holding the reins tightly, aware that one misstep could bring the entire house of Tudor crashing down. The kingdom stands on a knife's edge, and you, my friend, are right there, witnessing the last flickers of a dying star. You feel the chill in the air as Edward VI's health steadily deteriorates. The young king, barely in his mid-teens, is becoming a ghost of the vibrant boy who once sought to command the throne with sharp wit and pious fervor. His cough grows harsher, his breaths shorter, and the pallor of his skin seems to suck the color out of the once bright court. Meanwhile, John Dudley, now Duke of Northumberland, is watching closely. His ambitions, carefully concealed behind a facade of loyalty, are about to take a darker turn. The question on everyone's lips, although no one dares say it outright, is what will happen when Edward dies. You stand among courtiers whispering in shadowed chambers about the fragile line of succession. Mary Tudor, Henry's eldest daughter, is a Catholic and a thorn in the side of the Protestant establishment. Elizabeth, younger sister, walks a tightrope between factions, still finding her place amid court intrigues. And then there is Lady Jane Grey, the Protestant darling, and Dudley's carefully placed pawn. Your quirky tidbit? Lady Jane Grey reportedly could recite entire biblical passages in Hebrew. Yes, Hebrew. In a time when most nobles struggled to read anything beyond the prayer book, she was a linguistic prodigy. Talk about a girl ahead of her time. Historians still argue whether Dudley's plan to place Jane on the throne was driven by sincere belief in her capability or pure cold-blooded political calculation. Whatever the truth, the stage is set for one of England's most dramatic power plays. Edward VI's failing health hastens the crisis. You find yourself pacing the halls of Whitehall Palace as servants prepare the king's chambers with fresh linens and medicinal herbs, mostly ineffective, but a comfort nonetheless. The air smells faintly of lavender and burnt rosemary, the medieval equivalent of aromatherapy. The young king, aware of his impending death, drafts a devise for the succession. It's a complicated legal document that attempts to bypass his half-sisters and name Lady Jane Grey as his heir. You marvel at the audacity. To exclude Mary and Elizabeth from the line of succession was unprecedented. You overhear Edward's final speeches, where he exhorts his advisors to protect Protestantism, urging them to secure Jane's place on the throne. There is a haunting clarity in his voice, a mixture of youthful idealism and tragic resignation. Then, the inevitable moment arrives. Edward VI dies on July 6, 1553, at just 15 years old. You watch as the news spreads through the kingdom like wildfire. The public reaction is mixed. Some mourn the young king sincerely. Others whisper prayers for Mary's return, hoping to restore Catholicism. The streets of London buzz with uncertainty and fear. John Dudley moves quickly, announcing Jane Grey as the rightful queen. Her proclamation is swift and efficient. The machinery of government shifts gears almost overnight. But the people are not convinced. Mary Tudor, far from London, is already rallying support. She claims her rightful place as queen, backed by nobles and commoners alike who resent Dudley's manipulations. You see letters flying, armies assembling, and alliances forming. The realm is on the brink of civil war. Jane Grey, thrust into the spotlight with little warning, faces impossible odds. She is young, intelligent, and determined, but her reign will last only 9 days, the shortest in English history. Your mind reels at the thought of a teenager suddenly crowned queen, surrounded by enemies, with the weight of a kingdom collapsing around her. Historians still debate whether Jane was a willing participant in Dudley's scheme, or a tragic pawn sacrificed to save his ambitions. As the conflict escalates, you feel the tension ratchet higher, the old Tudor ghost stirring in every whispered plot and every clashing sword. England is about to burn in a succession crisis that will shape its future forever, and you are there, right in the middle of it. You feel the tension crackling through London streets like static electricity. The brief, ill-fated reign of Lady Jane Grey, 9 days that flicker and fade like a candle in the wind, is over before most people had the chance to properly learn her name. The city's mood shifts rapidly as Mary Tudor, Bloody Mary in the making, marches triumphantly toward the throne. Jane is arrested, imprisoned in the Tower of London, and becomes a symbol of tragic innocence caught in ruthless political currents. You picture her, a young woman just 16, trying to navigate a world where loyalty means life or death, and where trust is as scarce as clean water. Meanwhile, Mary's arrival is met with a fervor you can almost hear in the roar of crowds. The Catholic Restoration begins almost immediately. Masses are reinstated, monasteries reopened, and those who supported Jane's claim are branded traitors. It is a time when faith and politics are tangled like the thorns of a deadly briar. Your quirky tidbit, Mary's nickname, Bloody Mary, comes from the burning of nearly 300 Protestants during her 5-year reign, a grim figure of persecution, but one historians argue that this number is often exaggerated to demonize her. Whether 300 or more, it was enough to make her reign notorious. Historians still debate whether Mary was a devout ruler trying to restore her mother's faith, or a cruel zealot bent on revenge. Either way, the kingdom is divided, and fear hangs heavy in the air. You observe Elizabeth quietly watching from the sidelines, her own life shadowed by danger. Suspicion clings to her like a second skin, and the court is a minefield of shifting alliances and secret whispers. Mary's marriage to Philip II of Spain further complicates matters, tying England to a powerful and unpopular foreign power. You can almost hear the grumbling among English nobles who see this as a threat to national sovereignty. The kingdom's religious pendulum swings wildly, Protestant to Catholic and back again, leaving common folk confused and wary. Churches change signs, sermons, even hymns, making Sunday worship feel like a gamble. As Mary's reign deepens, you notice subtle cracks forming. Her insistence on religious uniformity alienates many, and her health, already frail, begins to fail. The stage is set for Elizabeth to step back into the spotlight, poised between danger and destiny. You feel the story's pulse quicken as England braces for yet another dramatic turn. The atmosphere shifts again as Mary Tudor's reign stumbles forward, heavy with both fervor and foreboding. You watch her pale face, often lined with worry, as she battles not only political enemies, but the relentless siege of illness. Her marriage to Philip II of Spain is cold and calculated, more political alliance than romance, and the English court senses the chill. Meanwhile, Elizabeth, now in her mid-20s, remains under watchful eyes. She walks a tightrope of survival, her Protestant sympathies making her suspect, yet her royal blood keeping her indispensable. You see her attending secret Protestant services, speaking softly, but with quiet resolve, aware that every word could be a trap. Your quirky tidbit? Elizabeth was known to use coded messages hidden in her letters, sometimes embedding her thoughts in poetry or obscure references to evade the ever-present scrutiny of Mary's spies. Imagine sending text today with a wink emoji and it being a matter of life or death. Historians still argue how close Elizabeth truly came to execution during Mary's reign. Some say it was a narrow escape. Others suggest political caution kept Mary from moving against her half-sister outright. Either way, the tension between the sisters simmers like a pot ready to boil over. As Mary's health worsens, her hopes of producing an heir vanish with her repeated miscarriages and phantom pregnancies. England braces for uncertainty once more, the question of succession hanging heavy like a storm cloud. You find yourself amid court discussions filled with uneasy speculation. What will happen if Mary dies childless? Will Elizabeth inherit, or will the Catholic factions mount a last desperate stand? The religious and political factions sharpen their knives, each ready to fight for their vision of England's future. Amid this turmoil, Elizabeth begins to prepare herself, quietly but deliberately, for the possibility of queenship. She studies governance, manages alliances, and cultivates a reputation for intelligence and pragmatism. You watch her evolution from a cautious princess into a formidable monarch in waiting, aware that the fate of England might rest on her shoulders soon. The court buzzes with rumors, plots, and fears, but Elizabeth's calm exterior never wavers. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's cautious diplomacy or sheer survival instinct saved her during these perilous years. But one thing is clear: the Tudor saga is far from over. The throne awaits its next player, and you are witnessing the calm before another storm. You feel the palpable shift as Mary's final days approach. The once fiery queen, whose reign earned her the infamous Bloody Mary title, now lies weakened by illness and the weight of a kingdom weary of religious turmoil. The great Tudor drama edges closer to its next climactic act. As Mary's health declines, Elizabeth's position transforms from precarious to inevitable. You see the court hold its breath, sensing the end of an era and the uncertain dawn of another. The succession question is no longer whispered in shadows. It is about to become a reality. Elizabeth moves with measured grace. You picture her rehearsing speeches, perfecting her public image, and preparing to command loyalty from a divided nation. The weight of the crown settles over her shoulders, heavy but familiar. Your quirky tidbit? Elizabeth had a remarkable collection of wigs. Reports say she owned over 50 to conceal her thinning hair, a concern for a queen whose appearance was as much a tool of power as her words. Imagine a monarch juggling politics and hair care like a modern influencer. Historians still argue about how Elizabeth's carefully cultivated persona, the Virgin Queen, aloof but alluring, helped stabilize England, or masked deeper insecurities and political compromises. When Mary finally dies on November 17, 1558, Elizabeth steps into the throne with quiet determination. The transition is peaceful, a relief after years of upheaval. You can almost feel the collective exhale of a nation eager for stability. Elizabeth's early reign is defined by pragmatism. She balances religious tensions delicately, re-establishing Protestantism without igniting widespread rebellion. You watch as she deftly negotiates with Parliament and the Church, careful to avoid the mistakes of her predecessors. The famous Elizabethan religious settlement unfolds, a compromise that allows some flexibility in worship, designed to keep the peace, but pleasing no one entirely. You overhear murmurs in taverns and courts alike. Some call her a political genius. Others whisper, cunning manipulator. Both might be true. As England breathes a tentative sigh of relief, Elizabeth turns her attention to foreign threats, culture, and exploration. The Tudor story is expanding beyond court intrigue into global ambition. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's choices were driven more by survival instinct or visionary leadership. But watching her now, you realize one thing. England's roller coaster has settled onto a new track, and this queen is ready for the ride. And you are here for every twist. You sense the stirring of a new chapter as Elizabeth steps confidently into her role, the crown resting heavy but steady on her head. Gone are the days of religious purges and violent upheaval, or so it seems. Instead, a careful dance begins, one balancing faith, power, and diplomacy. Elizabeth's reign quickly becomes known for its sharp wit and sharper politics. You watch her navigate the labyrinth of English and European power like a seasoned player in a high-stakes game. She uses marriage proposals as political tools, offering and withdrawing them to keep foreign powers guessing, like a royal poker player bluffing with a straight face. Her refusal to marry earns her the title, the Virgin Queen, but this strategic singlehood is more about power than piety. Marrying could mean sharing authority or inviting foreign influence. Better to rule alone and keep rivals at arm's length. Your quirky tidbit? Elizabeth was famous for her lavish wardrobe, owning hundreds of dresses, many decorated with intricate embroidery and jewels, enough to make modern fashion influencers jealous. Yet, every outfit was a carefully crafted message, signaling power, purity, or diplomacy. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth's unmarried status was a political masterstroke or a personal choice driven by fear and past heartbreaks. Whatever the truth, it became a defining feature of her reign. As the religious tensions simmer beneath the surface, Elizabeth's religious settlement offers a middle path, but discontent bubbles quietly in the background. Catholics and Puritans alike find reasons to grumble. You overhear whispered plots and secret prayers, a reminder that peace is often just the absence of war, not the end of conflict. Meanwhile, the arts flourish. You witness Shakespeare beginning his meteoric rise, and England's cultural renaissance blossoms, bringing a lightness to a time still shadowed by political intrigue. But beneath the pageantry and poetry, threats loom. Spain, under the Catholic King Philip II, eyes England with suspicion and hostility, while internal plots threaten Elizabeth's rule. Your pulse quickens as you realize this is not a peaceful reign, but a tense tightrope walk. Elizabeth faces threats from Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic claimant with her own dangerous ambitions. The Queen's intelligence network hums quietly, uncovering conspiracies and keeping enemies at bay. You marvel at Elizabeth's resilience, and sharp mind, qualities that will define her for decades. And as England sails toward the Elizabethan age, you feel history turning its page again, full of promise and peril. You are watching the rise of a legend. You feel the tension ratchet higher as Elizabeth's reign faces its greatest external challenge, the Spanish Armada. Spain's King Philip II, furious over England's support of Dutch rebels and piracy on the seas, assembles a massive fleet to invade and crush the heretic island nation once and for all. You can almost hear the creak of wooden ships and the roar of cannon fire, the smell of salt and gunpowder thick in the air. England prepares for war, a David versus Goliath scenario, as the smaller English navy and their faster, more maneuverable ships face off against Spain's formidable armada. Your quirky tidbit? English sailors used fire ships, vessels set ablaze, and sent drifting into the tightly packed Spanish fleet, causing panic and chaos. It was like medieval naval warfare's version of a Molotov cocktail. Creative, ruthless, and effective. Historians still argue whether the Armada's defeat was due more to England's naval tactics, Spanish miscalculations, or the infamous Protestant wind, a strong storm that scattered the Armada as it tried to retreat around Scotland and Ireland. The dramatic confrontation in 1588 marks a turning point, a moment when England's naval power and Elizabeth's leadership become legendary. You witness Elizabeth's famous speech at Tilbury, where she declares she has the heart and stomach of a king, rallying her troops and countrymen. Her charisma and resolve become a symbol of national pride and resilience. But victory comes with costs. The war strains England's finances and leaves the nation wary of future conflicts. Elizabeth's cautious diplomacy keeps the peace for years afterward, but the threat of Spain and Catholic plots never fully disappear. Meanwhile, Mary, Queen of Scots, imprisoned in England for years, remains a looming threat. Her Catholic supporters see her as the rightful queen, and plots to free or replace Elizabeth abound. You watch as Elizabeth balances mercy and ruthlessness, finally ordering Mary's execution in 1587, a decision fraught with controversy and consequences. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth was forced into this choice, or if it was a calculated act of political survival. As the decades pass, Elizabeth's image as the Virgin Queen and Gloriana grows, intertwined with England's cultural renaissance and imperial ambitions. You sense that England is no longer just a nation on the edge, but a rising world power, with Elizabeth at its helm. And yet, beneath the grandeur, the ever-present shadow of mortality and politics remains. You stand at the crossroads of history, watching the Tudor legacy unfold in all its complexity. You feel the slow passage of time weigh on Elizabeth now. Decades on the throne have carved lines into her face and steel into her gaze, but the Queen's spirit remains as fierce as ever. The crown has become her identity, and the kingdom her legacy. England has blossomed into a cultural powerhouse. The theaters overflow with audiences eager to hear Shakespeare's latest plays. Poets and explorers alike push the boundaries of knowledge and art. You almost hear the distant echoes of lute music and the murmur of philosophical debates in candlelit rooms. Yet beneath this flourishing surface lies a simmering tension. Religious divisions continue to gnaw at the fabric of society. Puritans demand further reforms. Catholics plot in secret, hoping for a change in the winds. Your quirky tidbit? Elizabeth was known to consult her Book of Unicorns, a bestiary filled with mythical creatures that symbolized her reign's mystique and power. Unicorns, after all, were considered symbols of purity and strength, just like her carefully crafted image. Historians still debate whether Elizabeth's refusal to marry was an act of personal sovereignty or a political strategy to keep foreign powers at bay. You see the Queen navigate a world where personal loneliness blends with public duty, a monarch who sacrificed much for her kingdom. You witness the intricate dance of court life, where wit and words are weapons, and a misplaced phrase could be fatal. As Elizabeth ages, the question of succession becomes unavoidable. The Queen has no children, and the uncertainty stirs anxiety among nobles and commoners alike. James VI of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, stands as the likely heir, but his claim is fraught with complications. You sense the undercurrents of political maneuvering intensify, with factions jockeying to influence the future of the throne. Elizabeth's death will mark the end of the Tudor dynasty, but her legacy will echo for centuries. And as you watch her final years unfold, you feel the weight of history pressing down, reminding you that every reign, no matter how glorious, must come to an end. The final years of Elizabeth's reign unfold with a mix of quiet reflection and mounting unease. You sense the kingdom holding its breath, aware that the era of the Tudors is nearing its close, and the future is veiled in uncertainty. Elizabeth's health wanes. You picture her seated in the great halls of Whitehall Palace, wrapped in rich fabrics, her once fiery eyes now tinged with weariness. Her advisors tread carefully, knowing the fragility of the moment. Her legendary wit and command remain, but the Queen grows more introspective, aware that her time is slipping away like grains of sand through delicate fingers. Your quirky tidbit? Elizabeth had a peculiar fascination with her portraits, commissioning many to maintain the illusion of eternal youth and vitality, so much so that some paintings make her look decades younger than she actually was. Think of it as the original Photoshop. Historians still argue how much Elizabeth truly prepared for the succession, or whether she preferred to leave her courtiers guessing until the very end. As rumors swirl, England braces for the transition. The looming question: who will inherit the throne and with what consequences? James VI of Scotland, son of Mary, Queen of Scots, waits patiently, his claim complicated but supported by many as the natural successor. You imagine the delicate political negotiations behind the scenes, alliances formed and broken in whispers and shadows. Elizabeth's death on March 24, 1603, brings a palpable hush over the land. The Tudor chapter closes, and the Stuart era dawns with James' peaceful accession. You reflect on the journey from Henry VIII's brutal, bloated end through the religious storms of Mary's reign to Elizabeth's glittering but fraught golden age. The Tudor legacy is a tapestry woven with ambition, faith, power, and resilience. And now you find yourself standing at the threshold of a new era, having witnessed the rise and fall of a dynasty that shaped England and the world. As the Tudor dynasty fades, you find yourself amid the dawn of the Stuart era, with James VI of Scotland ascending to the English throne as James I. The merging of the crowns marks the end of Tudor rule, but also the beginning of a complex and often turbulent new chapter in English history. James arrives with his own ambitions and quirks, aiming to unite England and Scotland under one stable rule. But the challenges are immediate. Religious tensions persist, political factions remain fractured, and the memories of the Tudors' turbulent reign linger like ghosts at the feast. You notice James' fondness for the divine right of kings, a belief that monarchs rule by God's will, not by the consent of their subjects. This idea will soon sow seeds of conflict with Parliament and the people. Your quirky tidbit: James was a prolific writer and scholar, even authoring works on witchcraft and theology. He famously sponsored the King James Bible, which would leave a lasting imprint on English language and culture. Historians still debate whether James' rule was marked more by intellectual aspiration or by political naivete that eventually led to unrest and revolution. As you walk through the corridors of this new reign, you see the continuities and changes. The Queen's old court gives way to new advisors and new challenges, but the same age-old questions of power and loyalty remain. The stage is set for England's next great upheavals, but for now, you savor the echoes of the Tudor age, the deaths, the dramas, the dazzling reigns, all the stories that brought you here. You realize that history never really ends. It simply turns a page, and you have been witness to one of its most fascinating chapters. You come to the closing moments of the Tudor saga, the legacy of Henry VIII and his formidable descendants settling into history's vast tapestry. The shocks, the betrayals, the deaths, they all blend into the story you now carry with you. You reflect on Henry VIII's terrifying end, the swollen body, the unbearable pain, and how it echoes in the lives of those who followed: the zealous Mary, the cunning Elizabeth, and the world they shaped. The Tudor period was a crucible of change, religious revolution, ruthless politics, and cultural rebirth. It laid the groundwork for modern England, though not without deep scars. Your quirky tidbit: despite the political turmoil, Tudor England had some surprisingly quirky customs, like the use of crocodile dung as sunscreen, or the bizarre fashion trend of bum rolls to make hips look wider. Fashion was war in its own right. Historians still argue whether the Tudors were uniquely cruel monarchs or simply products of a harsh era that demanded ruthless decisions. As you close this chapter, you feel the weight of their lives, not just kings and queens, but humans grappling with power, faith, love, and survival. The story of the Tudors is a reminder that history is never neat or simple, but always alive and complicated. And as you turn off the lights and let your mind drift, remember the shadows and the light, both cast by these unforgettable figures. Sleep well, knowing you have traveled through one of history's most captivating tales.